Imagine a guide that is actually giving you useful information. Well, you just found one. I have been playing Souls games since 2012, which means I have probably seen this screen more than a regular Souls player. Today I want to talk about the build I will bring to Shadow of the Erdtree. If you want to see more builds in the future, drop a comment below. If not, tell us what build you will use for Shadow of the Erdtree expansion. But let's get started now. Now, you have probably watched or came across those clickbait tier list videos. If you paid attention, majority of the time they don't show you the stats because they are showcasing those weapons on max level characters. It is easy to melt every boss when you maxed out the corresponding stats on that character, so instead of showcasing an endgame build against Margit, I will just show you how you can build a powerful character. Based on the boss fights, I change my weapons all the time, but there are some crucial items I always make sure to have in my arsenal, so let's talk about these must-have items first. Okay, I don't know how to pronounce this dagger, so I'm not even gonna try. Misery Cord is a dagger you should always have on your second weapon slot regardless of your build. It has the highest crit multiplier in the game, and it will make your entire playthrough so much easier. It is a dagger, so it barely weighs anything. You can ignore this dagger's existence, play your game normally, and when you stagger a boss, just swap to this dagger and deal an absurd amount of damage. Then you can just swap back to your main weapon and pretend nothing happened. You will lose nothing by having it on your second weapon slot. Recently it also became my favorite weapon to use while exploring the world. If something can be backstabbed, you will instantly turn the easy mode of that encounter. Also, you can find it right at the beginning of the game, past the big room with Grafted Sign in Stormvale Castle. Unlock this door with Stone Sword key, and dagger is right there in the room. Trust me, this is one side weapon you won't regret upgrading. Now that we have an amazing crit weapon, we can invest in optimizing our character. Grab a basic dagger for 400 runes and put Golden Vow Ash of War on it. You will deal 15% more damage, and you will also take 10% less damage for free. Once again, you don't need to invest any stats, you get a massive buff just by pressing a single button. The Ash of War version counts as a weapon buff, so you can also stack it with Flame Grant Me Strength, and you can gain even more damage out of it. I will put the wiki links of every item I'm showcasing in the description so you can check the locations of every item. By now you all probably know the most useful talismans for each build. I will quickly mention 5 talismans I swap back and forth all the time based on the situation. Dagger Talisman, combining this with a dagger I mentioned earlier, will most likely let you one-shot any enemy while exploring the world. Axe Talisman, if you're using heavy weapons, just go for Axe Talisman and your charged heavy attacks will destroy bosses. Jump attacks are especially good against some bosses like Godfrey and Elden Beast, so Claw Talisman will simply offer you a massive damage boost. These are some items I always make sure to have on me, so now let's get into the build. Fate is easily jack of all trades in Elden Ring. There are so many different spells you can use in each situation. There are some buffs that will skyrocket your resistance, so you can be extremely tanky against any type of enemy. There are healings, regenerations, different types of damage incantations, but for me, lightning has a special place. In the previous Souls games I always went with quality builds, but in Elden Ring, lightning scales from dexterity and it allows you to level some crazy good builds. Now, before I get to the equipment, let's start with the stats. Of course, there's no upper limit to level, but if you want to play the endgame content with the intended level and also want to be active in the multiplayer, you should be around rune level 139 to 150. You will have to adjust the numbers a little bit based on your starter class, but this is pretty much how your stats should look. You can remove 5 points from end runes and put them in Vigor or Mind if you like. You definitely have the flexibility, but we won't be casting a lot of spells, so you don't really need more FP. One thing you will need is Radagon's Sword Seal for extra 5 points in some of the important stats, and lastly you will need Lightning Shrouding and Dexterity Note Crystal Tears. With these you can reach 80 Dexterity and boost your damage to a really sweet spot. I have some fixed talismans I pretty much never change. Radagon's Sword Seal, Erdtree's Favor +2 for a little bit of boost to maximum HP, stamina and equipment load, Lightning Scorpion Charm for even more lightning damage in exchange of some reduction in damage negation, and last talisman slot is optional. You will change this talisman slot based on your current playstyle. We have Crit Talisman for dagger, Charged Heavy Talisman for heavier weapons, Jump Talisman for dual katanas, Shard of Alexander for Ashes of War, and lastly Rotten Winged Sword Insignia for a really fast weapon I will show in a moment. When it comes to armor, it is entirely up to you. I don't like min-maxing my armor, and since we're not doing PvP with this build, your poise doesn't really matter. I like fashion more, but if you want to get most out of this build, you can use the headpieces that are giving you extra stats. Now the fun part of the build. Dexterity has so many great options. I will show all the weapons that I like with this build, but as long as a weapon gets C scaling with dexterity when you apply lightning infusion, you can make any weapon work. Let's start with possibly the strongest PvP weapon in the game, because it is also extremely powerful in PvE. Claw weapons usually don't get a lot of spotlight, however there's something absolutely broken with Raptor Talons. Despite having one of the fastest heavy attacks in the entire game, it also does more heavy attack damage than many heavy weapons in the game. Naturally, while playing with Raptor Talons, you will want to spam heavy attacks rather than light attacks. Claw weapons don't have access to lightning strike, so we don't really have a proper Ash of War for this weapon. However, you can use Crackblade to buff it a little bit, or you can use Royal Knight's Resolve to buff your next attack. For your free talisman slot, you will use Rotten Winged Sword Insignia to gain attack power from successive attacks, and you are ready to melt bosses. It will not work perfectly against every single boss, not because of the damage, but because of the reach and the moveset. I use Raptor Talons against slow humanoid bosses like Godfrey and Mo. Against bosses that are delaying their attacks and waiting too long between attacks, this weapon really shines. But if you're fighting a really tall boss that is also moving around too much, then this weapon becomes a little bit pain to play, and at that point I just swap to another weapon. Next is a greatsword with Lightning Strike Ash of War. I like the moveset of these two over Claymore on Dex builds, but all three of these greatswords are amazing, so you can go with any of them. If you infuse a weapon with lightning, you can't really apply lightning armament or lightning grease on it. However, Lightning Strike will put another stack of lightning buff on top of your weapon's default lightning damage, resulting in some absurd damage numbers. As a dexterity build, we don't use a lot of heavy weapons, so a greatsword will be your best weapon for some heavy poise damage. Talisman of choice for this weapon will be Shard of Alexander. You can hit any enemy with Lightning Strike while they're recovering from your critical hit, making the weapon combo even stronger. Or if you don't feel comfortable using Lightning Strike offensively, you can swap Shard of Alexander with Axe Talisman for enhanced heavy attacks. I also have a Relic Sword as a I am too tired to deal with that enemy button. This thing doesn't have any synergy with the build, but I have it in my inventory in case I want to quickly clear an area. Lastly, I have Keen Claymore in case an enemy has a massive lightning resistance. You never know what DLC will bring. I still remember going into Ring City with my Pyromancer only to do almost no damage against Demon Prince. Another weapon type that is extremely strong with this build is Katanas. Nagakiba is the reason why I have 13 strength in this build. I generally don't use this katana because of how powerful it is. Try power stancing 2 lightning Nagakibas and you will see why. It has a passive bleed build up, so makes the burst damage even stronger. Our main playstyle with dual katanas will be jump attacks and roll attacks, so you will be using Claw Talisman. These attacks use both of your katanas at the same time, so they offer an amazing recovery time. Possibly the strongest setup for this build, and as I said, I tend to avoid this weapon because it is just too powerful and I feel guilty for almost chasing a boss with them. Another katana I really like is Dragon Scale Blade. In many ways, it is a downgraded version of Nagakiba. It has less range, less damage and lacks the bleed, but I mainly use dual Dragon Scale Blade because of how amazing they look. I just love the blue lightning so much. As I said, it is a downgrade to Nagakiba, but it applies Frostbite when buffed. You will have so much damage with this build that you will have flexibility to swap to any weapon if you like their look or moveset more. In this instance, Nagakiba is the strongest katana, but I generally use Dragon Scale Blade because I like the look of it more. Now the last set of weapons for this build is more about the Ashes of War than the weapons themselves. Have 2 weapons with high dexterity scaling and use Thunderbolt for some absurd amounts of range damage. And also have Gut Skin Peeler with Black Flame Tornado. It is an extra option if lightning doesn't work so well against an enemy, which never happens by the way. You should use Fire Scorpion Charm along with the Shard of Alexander to get the most out of Gut Skin Peeler, but most of the time you will not need this weapon. It is just there as an option to melt bosses that have such high health pulls. Lastly, for our incantations, use Gravel Stone Seal to boost the lightning damage, but keep it in mind we only have 40 fate. Your incantation damage won't be anything crazy. It is just there as an option if you want to use some spells every now and then. For incantations, you should be using Flame Grant Me Strength for damage boost, or you can use Black Flame's Protection. It will give you so much physical protection, but you will need to combine it with Crimson Seed Talisman, so you can negate the 20% healing reduction you get from this spell. And for our offensive spells, Lightning Spear Spear and Ancient Dragon's Lightning Strike are your best options, but keep it in mind you only have 40 fate, and without these talismans on your screen, they won't do too much damage. One last tip, you can increase your damage even further by using freezing pots and applying frostbite. Okay, if you made it this far, consider giving a like and subscribe, it helps a lot. Also comment down what builds you will use for Shadow of the Erdtree. But this is it for today, I will see you on the next one, bye.